Greetings and welcome back to the show, World War II Books, Where to Start. I'm your host, Field Marshal William. My friends call me Bill Slim, formerly beloved of Churchill, Governor General of Australia, and the Right Honorable Viscount Slim. Today, let's look at the CPO/PTO and do some little stuff, little itty-bitty gritty stuff that most folks don't come across or not too familiar to Western readers, including elephants of all things. So, right, let's kick it off, shall we? Asian Armageddon by Peter Harmsen from 2021, 410 pages total. So this is the final volume of his Pacific War trilogy, and I think it's a very good starting point for beginners to the war who want a general history of the Pacific without being overwhelming or encyclopedic. Not too many name drops, not too deep on the background before the war, and never bogging down in one particular area for way too long. Now I've read the first and now the third volume of this thing. I haven't read the second one. I hop, skip, and jump around here because there are mostly monumental trilogy general survey histories of the war, and sometimes I just can't wade through it beginning to end over and over again. So I hop, skipped, and jumped on this one, even though they're each one similar volume than normal. But that's just the way I did it. I think it can be quite exhausting, if you do like 5 general histories of a particular topic, man, and their trilogies. That's a lot of words. So no need to do it over and over again, point by point. So Harmsen does display some writer sins, but he's not overly reliant on them, such as In Other Words and The Unsinkable Aircraft Carrier, which I really think he debases himself by using this one. He seems to cut above most authors I've read who deploy that deplorable phrase, so I think it's really kind of stepping down for him. Otherwise, his writing is fairly clean and efficient. So he's going to start us off on Cape Gloucester with its infamous rains. We're going to do the Ichigo Offensive, Marianas, Chindits, the Death Railway, Arakan, and the Imphal Offensive. Along the way, we're going to stop off at Biak and discuss some Japanese cannibalism. And the note that American bodies were thought of as white pigs by the islanders, and the Japanese were thought of as black pigs by the islanders. This goes along with some of my takeaways from the Eichelberger memoir, which I recently covered, that I need at least one book on Biak. I really do. And we've also got some GIs wearing bracelets strung with Japanese teeth as decoration. I don't think Eichelberger was that graphic in his memoir about that particular episode on Biak, but a good little detail there. As for the Marianas, it's presented with one of the, pretty well, but one of the images I came away with from there was a Jeep. It's driving across country rather than take the roads to get wherever they're going faster, but they're driving across a field of Japanese bloated bodies in the sun, and just rotting away in the sun. And as they drive over them, they're popping like balloons, and the occupants of the Jeep are just puking their guts out nonstop. That one will stick with you for a while. Let's see, what else do we have? It makes an interesting point about the Ichigo Offensive too, and I don't know if I've noted this before, just kind of blasted past it without realizing it. It's normally seen by historians as a wasteful exercises and resources, that these men could have been far better utilized in other theaters and other areas at that point of the war. But Harmsen is going to point out that it was done to get Allied bombers out of effective bombing range of the home islands. And once had achieved its goal, they stopped the offensive. Something else I wasn't aware of. Apparently Admiral Fukudome has written a memoir. I think I should hunt that down. Now I don't know whether this is just like war diaries he published later after war as a memoir, whether he actually sat down and did some contemplating and then wrote about his time in the war. I'm not sure. I wonder if it's in print, or if it's in English. Something I should probably hunt for. There's also a little section on Japanese POWs I found interesting. Some were very grateful for their decent treatment by the Americans and Allies, and were very cooperative in their camps. But others were scheming and demanding more amenities and privileges. In Australia, there was even a prison break involving more than 350 men, of which 250 plus were killed by the Australian authorities while being rounded up. Can't imagine there was too much sympathy there for Japanese breaking out of their compound. So while this is a very mild-mannered and very handy book on the PTO CBI volume, packed into about 400 pages of main body text, it's got a lot going for it. It's not superb or outstanding, but it gets the job done. and is a good counterpoint to some grandiose American-only centered histories of the Pacific conflict. So I give it 3 stars overall, and that's Peter Harmson's Asian Armageddon. All right, then we're going to come back with Burma 44 by James Holland. Now, this is from 2016, 413 pages total. This is about the Battle of the Admin Box, a small sideshow in Burma that was part of the larger Japanese effort to kick the Brits out of the country. Holland has earned my opprobrium in earlier times, if you recall my Battle of Britain video, and I was very hesitant to repeat the experience of his pen to paper. But considering this is a rather lost and obscure, if not almost totally forgotten battle, as he puts it, I took the plunge, and to my relief, it's a much cleaner and leaner effort. That's not to say it's immaculate, for he hasn't purged himself of his addiction to cliches. He's just trimmed it down to a select few, like in other words, needless to say, and put them to their paces. It's bearable. We get right into the action with the briefest of intros, along with a short piece about myself, Bill Slim, before getting into the thick jungle. But then, for some damn reason, he just stops us in a couple hours into this to regurgitate the course of the war's events for all of us. A mini lecture. I picture this in a dusky clearing as we're getting on towards evening and we're ready to make camp. And the mosquitoes are starting to swarm. We're digging our foxholes. We're putting up our pup tents. We're trying to find our mosquito netting. And this jackass of an officer wants to lecture us. Come on, man. This is not the time or the place. It's not. We hardly need a recap of what has gone before for this particular fight. We really don't. And perhaps he thought himself clever for burying this within the text after a good rollicking start to the book. But it just ticks you off, treating you like a child. After being promised at the start he wasn't going to talk down to you, he ends up talking down to you. Didn't like that at all. But once we get past that, he's going to follow a few particular soldiers, like an American in England who becomes an ambulance driver for the Brits, and a couple army pilots, or a couple pilots in the Woodpecker Squadron, and a few others. The Bengal famine is covered well enough here. But he's one of those that exonerates old Winnie for just about any responsibility for what happened in the Bengal famine, rather breezily at that, and it feels quite tone deaf at this time and place, even though this was written a little while ago. But it's still in what 2016 would be out of touch with reality, I think. It doesn't accord with any kind of, come on, man. He was responsible for some of the lack of relief of the Bengal famine. I don't think there's any way of sidestepping the big pile of shit in the road there. You just really can't. But somehow Holland makes the giant leap over that pile and goes on with business as usual. And I think that's a big strike against him. So the Brits did like the Lee tanks we gave them in Lend-Lease for jungle warfare. They found them quite useful in the jungle after experimentation. Even with the massive rain and amounts of mud and the temperatures, they found they were quite useful. Although they didn't like our Stuart tanks, which they called honeys. They thought they were pretty useless there. I didn't realize this, not being much of an armor aficionado myself, that the Lees ran on high octane avgas, which had to be difficult to get to the jungle. There was one amphibious operation that took a few months to get in order that had Lees swimming out of landing craft. They used hot pitch to seal up the cracks in the hull of the tanks so they wouldn't swamp. A rather clever local solution to an issue that was not so successfully done on D-Day. These things were shipped across the Bay of Bengal in LSTs and then driven off ramps in 5 feet of water. That must have raised your blood pressure a little bit, I imagine, but they did it fairly successfully. Pretty impressive. We got vultures dive bombing in the jungle, which is an aircraft type no one would want to dare fly in a combat zone in Europe, and they were kind of effective as long as the opposition air force wasn't around, because there wasn't much ground fire or AA to deal with over the jungles. said the Hurricanes were quite useless against Oscars and Zeeks. They also had a pilot out there who was the only winner of the VC in the Battle of Britain. Something I didn't recall from the Holland history of it, but really, I was screaming my way through that entire sorry business, and it's no wonder I don't recall it. This guy was named James Brindley Nicholson. He was awarded for the VC for an air action in September of 40, shooting down an enemy fighter while his aircraft was on fire, and he was burning alive in the cockpit. Nasty. You could say he earned it very well. He very well earned right there. And he flew in Burma until he was unfortunately killed while he was riding along as an observer in a B-24 in May of 45. Some other matters here. There was infamous slaughter of doctors and patients at a British hospital and a jungle clearing. They shot the doctors the second day after having slaughtered the patients the first day. But they missed one of them, although they were using 2 shots for each victim rather than 1, but they still somehow missed this one doctor, and he lived to tell the tale. Otherwise, we may not know any of the details about it. It's nasty business. It's your typical Japanese slaughter of people who are not a threat to them in any way and should be treated as prisoners, but of course, the Japanese don't do that. So, typical story of Japanese atrocities throughout the war. Parachutes. Through trial and error, they were looking for a cheaper material than silk, which was tough to get a hold of with a worldwide demand for silk for parachutes during the war. So they hit on the material of jute. They knocked the cost down to $5 instead of $20 per unit, which was really crucial considering the amount of supply drops they were doing in the jungle for the troops in the AMN box and of course across the whole Burmese jungle. So that's a pretty cool little tidbit there. And finally, you might have a stampede of elephants running amok through your camp one day. You might have massive centipedes and mosquitoes and other nasties chewing away at you. And you might even find a cobra rearing up on an unused oil drum one day while you're standing in line for chow. That's a hell of a place to have a war, man. It really is. All in all, I give it a 3-star experience. It covers an extremely little remarked battle in a theater that's a little remarked upon itself. That's Burma 44 by James Holland. Okay, and then finally, Elephant Company by Vicky Constantine Croak from 2014, 368 pages total. This is something completely different. I thought of this as a diversion from hardcore war stories, and because I like stories of endurance and survival and awful conditions, this attracted my attention. It is a travelogue. It's an adventure story, a tale of old colonial times, of man versus nature, getting to love nature, a life in an exotic and deadly locale, all of that with a bit of World War II sprinkled on top for that final oomph. Billy Williams, or as he was later known, Lieutenant Colonel J.H. Williams, he started off as a soldier in World War I in the outlying theaters of combat. And after the war, he did not want to go home to jolly old England and live a dull, colorless life there. He wanted a life of adventure, something different, more dramatic. Antique logging with elephants in Burma caught his fancy. Shipping out there and enduring the hazing of the established longtime agent on the scene, he gets to know how to use elephants for logging and how to care for them. As you can imagine, there's no veterinarians here, there, or anywhere out there. So you got to figure it all out for yourself. He even goes to the extreme end of the spectrum there by killing a couple of elephants himself to autopsy them and figure out their anatomy and what makes them tick and what kind of things they would be prone to disease-wise, and what looks like a healthy lung or healthy organs versus unhealthy organs in elephants. And it's something he regrets deeply later on, once he really becomes, kind of like the Marlon Perkins of Mutual Omaha kind of guy out there eventually. So it all smacks of Joseph Conrad's South Pacific novels, stories that I really was sucked into the atmosphere of, and the odd British code of ethics and behavior, the way they related to Burmese and to each other. It's so much more intriguing than any Jane Austen drawing room romance you can throw at me by leaps and bounds. Williams will expands his curiosity. So he goes on the survey of the Andaman Islands, thinking that would be a good place to expand teak logging for the British company he's working for. And this had to have been a hell of a trek. Totally untamed, pretty much unoccupied, unpopulated. He recruits some prison labor from Burmese prison cells to fill out the expedition here, as not too many white men or locals are willing to go along with this. And he's out there for quite a while, for several months, surveying this island. And they think that it could have been used for logging, but the company never goes for it. Too much to develop, too much capital sink into the affair, so they never do it. Let's see. What else we have? We even get the daughter of a local colonial who'd like to venture and living in the jungle. And she marries Williams. It's real Kipling stuff here. You know, all we need is Rikki Tikki Tavi, right? There's dengue fever and William's favorite elephant, Bandula, the king of all elephants. He carries him across a swollen river during a raging flood while he's delirious with dengue fever at one point to get to a hospital, way far away, where, they have only the most primitive medicines and you got to sweat it out kind of thing. So eventually the war finally pops up in the last run towards the finish line here. It's almost as an afterthought. She's not too focused on warfare at all. This is really just his life before the war. Then, by the way, he was in the war too. He gets promoted to be an officer right away because he can use those elephants to build bridges for the British Army in Burma. It's far handier to get elephants to the scene of where they need a bridge across the river rather than trying to move any kind of heavy equipment in there. It's just grossly impractical for heavy industrialized equipment for bridging stuff. So elephants are far more efficient at using, carrying logs already trained. And they built like 400 plus bridges during the course of the war for the Brits, something like that. Pretty cool. And we're going to finish up with a Japanese offensive that makes the Burmans and Williams, along with his elephants, run for their lives. And this is several dozen elephants doing a long distance trek to try to get out of Burma, which concludes with a wild climb over a high mountain range. And it's not like there's already an existing path up to the mountain pass. No, they have to carve out steps for these elephants to climb, like a ladder, over his mountain range. It sounds impossible, it sounds unlikely, but he was not going to leave them behind to the tender mercies of the Japanese. And he trusts that if he gets Bandula to do it, every other elephant will follow. They follow the leader kind of thing. Once they see one guy in the herd can do it, the others will do it. So this is quite epic. It had to be a hell of a sight to see. Several dozen elephants climbing a mountain. That had to be impressive. Some of these animals weigh 10,000 pounds or more. That must have been a real jaw dropper right there. So they get them beyond the reach of the Japanese and to some kind of safety until they can come back later after the Japanese have been driven out. So after the war, it becomes a famous author and a lecturer and tours the States a few times, writing like 4 books total and all, I believe. All this slightly before my time, of course, however much fame he had, I had never heard the name before. I ran across this book. So it's a wild tale, really a wild tale. It's not for everyone, I understand. It's not for everyone. But if you want something that's really different in the war, it has a bit of a feel-good aura about it, Company Elephants might fit the bill. So that'll do it for today. Today's adventures in the thick of the jungles of Southeast Asia, not named Vietnam. I hope one or more of these titles tickled your fancy. And until next time, I'm Bill Slim, and I've got to get cracking on those memoirs, and I've got to attend to some ceremonies in Australia. I understand the Queen is going to be visiting soon, so I got to get the place tidied up and presentable, eh? Until next time, happy reading.